Hello everyone, and welcome back for part 4 of Andor Season 2 is the best Star Wars since 1983. In the first 3 parts, I discussed the entirety of the first arc of the season, episodes 1 through 3. So today, I will be continuing on with episode 4, thus kicking off the second arc. If this is the first time you're arriving here though, and you'd like to hear my thoughts on the first 3 episodes, then you can find the link to those videos in the description. However, if you want to just jump in right here, then that's totally fine as well. Before we start today, I think it would be good to express some of my more vague, overarching thoughts about Arc 2 in its entirety before we get into all the nitty-gritty details. That way you have a bit of an understanding as to where my head is at when it comes to these group of episodes overall. To start, Arc 2 is a noticeable jump in quality from Arc 1. That's a pretty commonly shared opinion. While I certainly thought that Arc 1 had a lot of redeeming qualities about it and wasn't as bad as a lot of people made it out to be, I certainly have acknowledged that it had its fair share of issues. Some of the writing was poor compared to the quality that we are generally accustomed to seeing from this show. Some of the storylines felt pretty worthless and pretty drawn out, and didn't provide much in terms of impact on the overarching story of the season or developing our characters in very meaningful ways. A lot of time felt wasted and could have been much better served exploring our characters to much more significant degrees than what we got. However, a lot of these issues, as I just mentioned, that I have with the first arc of the season start to correct themselves by the time we reach Arc 2. Arc 2 feels much more focused and feels like it's actually building to something important to come. A lot of people cite episodes 7 through 9 as being their favorites of the season due to the emotional impact of that arc, but I think it's worth pointing out that without the groundwork that episodes 4 through 6 lay, episodes 7 through 9 wouldn't have had that same emotional impact that they had. Arc 2 in a lot of ways feels like a setup arc, but it's the setup that needed to happen in order for Arc 3 to be as good as it was. It does a very good job at getting us interested and emotionally invested in the conflict happening on Ghorman. The Ghorman people, the Ghorman culture are so well realized. The stakes of the situation, of the occupation, the weight of the feeling of the Imperials tightening their grip on this planet, and the natives' reaction to that in response, their feelings and actions becoming more and more rebellious in nature as time goes by is extremely intriguing to watch. There's also the fact that we, the audience, know what all of the Imperial hostility is about, while the characters don't, and it adds an extra sense of dread. And the emotions and mindsets of our main characters intimately involved in and surrounding that conflict I think are very well explored, which makes for extremely well-crafted drama. All this goes to say that Arc 2 is where I think Andor Season 2 really starts to come into its own, and begins to cement itself as one of the greatest pieces of Star Wars media ever conceived. So, without further ado, let us dive straight into episode 4, Ever Been to Ghorman. We pick up after another 1-year time jump, landing us now in the year BBY3. Bix is awoken suddenly in her sleep, which prompts her to grab the gun by her side. Upon entering the kitchen of this new place that she and Cassian are staying in, she once again is having a vision of Dr. Gorst. This lingering trauma was first teased back in episode 1, and even all this time later, she is still very much struggling with the trauma of the torture she was induced to back in season 1. And with some new added trauma with the attempted sexual assault from Lieutenant Kroll back in episode 3, Bix's mental state is now starting to noticeably get worse, something that's going to become even more apparent as the episodes progress. This is something that is not only going to become concerning in due time as it relates to her mental fitness to serve the rebellion, but also something that is going to affect Cassian because he's going to be constantly worried about Bix's health, taking away his focus towards his duty to the rebellion. However, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, so let's move on. Cassian is able to calm her down and snap her out of it, and when he asks the line asking, "Same thing again, Dr. Gorst?" leads us to infer that this isn't something that just popped up all of a sudden again. This has likely been a regular occurrence in the past year off-screen to the point where Cassian is well aware of exactly what's going on in Bix's head. Bix seems still pretty hesitant to talk about it though, which seems to be eating her up inside. Cut over to Ghorman. This is our first real look at the planet. It was only mentioned and shown in a slideshow back in episode 1. And this establishing shot of the Rima trade route is just beautiful. In just a single shot, you are already able to infer that Ghorman is a well-off and prospering planet. You wouldn't have even had to have seen episode 1 and the slideshow about them to already be able to infer that about the Ghorman people. So a nice piece of visual storytelling, thought I'd point that out. The first person that we are met with on Ghorman is Cyril, who appears to have been transferred here for reasons we aren't sure yet. As Cyril makes his way through the streets to his office building, we get our first look at the Ghorman culture, the Ghorman streets, the Ghorman architecture, Ghorman fashion, as well as some of the Ghorman people. We can already see in the background in the center of Palmo Plaza anti-imperial protesters. So in the year off screen, it seems that Imperials have likely been here for a while now, and are already starting to tighten their grip over the planet to the point where, at least for now, a handful of citizens deem it necessary to openly protest against them. You can already see the beginnings of what will eventually be the Ghorman massacre starting to take shape in a very early form. In Syril's office, Cyril has a very interesting conversation with his mother. It's not exactly what is being said that's of interest, but rather the implications we can make based off what's being said. Edie is not happy that Cyril left his post on Coruscant to take up a position on Ghorman. Besides Edie not being happy that Cyril would ask for a transfer away from Coruscant, Edie also makes some comments suggesting that she doesn't like the Ghorman people, like, "They're arrogant, they mock Emperor Palpatine, I'm never buying Ghorman again," which prompts Cyril to respond that she's been watching too much Imperial news. Now, if you remember back to episode 1, that was one of the key parts of the Empire's plan, to use carefully structured propaganda to turn the minds of the Imperial citizenry against Ghorman, a well-established planet within the Empire, so that they'll be able to commit the atrocities that they need to in order to advance their goals, without there being any resistance. And this little conversation that Cyril and Edie have is confirmation that the propaganda has been taking place for some time now, and so far is working. It's influenced the populace enough now to the point where they see Ghorman as an annoyance, something that the propaganda is going to keep fostering so that the galaxy's disdain for Ghorman grows. So by the time the massacre in Palmo Plaza rolls around, the people of the galaxy will turn a blind eye. So the plan seems to be working so far, even though we're a ways out from that pivotal moment still. Throughout the conversation, Cyril believes that he's being listened to, or watched or something. That's why he put a little string trap on his door earlier, and that's why he's defending Ghorman in this conversation with his mother. And he would be right, because we see some of the Ghorman natives have been listening to his conversation. The Ghormans believe that he can be a potential asset to them. He's an Imperial that seems to be conflicted, so if they are able to turn his loyalties to their side and use him as an inside man for information, that could be a valuable tool that could help them get rid of the Imperial occupation on the planet. However, as we'll soon come to understand, this is all part of Cyril's plan. He wants to be able to infiltrate the Ghorman rebels so that he can help the Empire snuff them out. Cyril is one step ahead of them. Cut back to Coruscant. Cassian and Bix make their way to a local shop to get some food for dinner. Cassian is very paranoid though. He feels like somebody is always watching him and doesn't like the fact that they're going to this specific shop, even though it's been a month since either of them have been there. This is further exacerbated by the fact that the shop owner recognizes Bix, which he visually is uncomfortable with. Bix, on the other hand, is a little more relaxed, more comfortable seemingly in the environment. Even though they're in the heart of the Empire here on Coruscant, Bix is a little better at trusting people, like this shop owner for example. This little character difference between the two of them is likely due to their respective lived experiences. She's able to be much more trusting of people. We see back in Arc 1 that she lived amongst a group of good and trustworthy people for an extended period of time, whereas Cassian, on the other hand, at least in the past couple years of his life, has seemingly always been on the run, going into highly dangerous situations, doing missions for Luthen all the time. He likely hasn't really been able to settle in any place with trustworthy people for an extended period of time. So I think that paranoia is a result of him always feeling like he's in an unsafe environment, like he can never truly let his guard down. We then briefly cut back to Ghorman. So Cyril is leaving his work building for the day and is walking home. As he makes his way through Palmo Plaza, the number of protesters has visibly increased since the morning. As he makes his way through the crowd of people, Cyril is stopped by a man selling spiders. But this isn't just any man, this is one of the Ghorman rebels that we saw earlier from the underground bunker. He gives Cyril a spider for free, and tells him that on the inside lies information about where their next meeting is going to be held. So after seemingly a long time now of being watched and listened to, Cyril has finally gotten a way in to see exactly what type of rebellion the Ghormans are building. His schemes he's been running are finally starting to pay off for him, it seems. Cut back to Coruscant. Bix and Cassian are back in the apartment cleaning up some tools and cooking food. Bix asks Cassian what he's going to tell Luthen next time he sees him. But what she's really trying to ask is whether or not he's going to tell him about the details of what happened to one of the soldiers that was with them on their last mission, that they ended up having to kill in order to survive. At least that's what we can infer since we never actually saw it happen. Cassian essentially tells her that he's not going to mention it or try to dwell on it because Luthen, as he says, quote, only cares about results. Only cares about results is an important line there because if you remember back to episode 2, that's the exact same quote that Partagaz used to describe Krennic to Dedra, word for word. So a very interesting little parallel that the show pokes at there. Cassian is on the defensive, trying to explain to Bix that this is the reality of war. What happened needed to be done in order to ensure their own survival. But Bix isn't able to just so easily forget about what happened. She says she can't stop seeing his face. I think this little conversation helps us infer that perhaps Cassian is a little more accustomed to the realities of war than Bix is, or at least a little better at dealing with it than her. Not to say that he doesn't care about individual people, but I think Cassian is more focused on the overarching goal and tries not to get too emotionally invested in individuals, at least to the best that he can. Where it seems Bix has a little more investment in people on a person-to-person basis, and it's very hard for her to just let go of someone who had to die a seemingly meaningless and sad death, in the way that this soldier presumably did. So once again, some really good character development here by the writers. We quickly cut back to Ghorman. As Cyril makes his way home to his apartment, he sees that the small trap of the little string of web that he attached to the door earlier that morning has been sprung. This gives him further confirmation that yes, he is indeed being watched and listened to everywhere he goes by the Ghormans. And even his own apartment has been bugged, likely with listening devices. Very clever work here by Cyril that has paid off. That is keeping him one step ahead of the Ghormans. Back on Coruscant again, Bix and Cassian are eating dinner when Bix asks him if they can go on a walk tomorrow. Cassian approves, but when Bix suggests that they go walking in the big park, Cassian's paranoia starts to creep up again. His paranoia for Bix's safety is once again proving itself to be an obstacle in their relationship, but I can't say it's unjustified. They are very much in a state of war at this point with the Empire, and Cassian wants to do everything in his power to save the one person that he truly loves in this galaxy. However, Bix tries to get through to him, saying that if this is truly a war like he's suggesting, then there's only so much that they can do to protect each other. So many different things are out of their control. This is obviously something that Cassian has a hard time accepting. He lost his sister, his mother, both to elements that were out of his control. And he doesn't want to lose Bix too to that same fate. You can tell at this moment that Bix sees all these little acts that Cassian does, going out of his way to try and protect her, is only distracting him from putting his full focus into defeating the Empire. Whether they live or die is out of their control now, so it's more beneficial for the both of them to put their full focus on winning this war. This mindset that Bix has is first teased here and definitely comes back to have major payoff down the line, because as we all know, in episode 9, Bix decides to leave Cassian for that very reason, so that he can put his full focus into winning the war. Her being with him, she will eventually realize is the final thing holding him back, and only then will he have the strength to do whatever is necessary to alter not only the course of the war, but the history of the galaxy. That goodbye is one of the most emotionally powerful and moving moments in the whole show, so I think it's worth noting that without that setup that the preliminary episodes provide, that payoff wouldn't have hit nearly as hard. So good job here by the writers for planting the seeds for what will eventually blossom into that moment. Back on Ghorman, that night, Cyril returns to his office building to retrieve some notes that he forgot. Or at least that's what he says. What he's really there for, however, is to secretly transmit to Dedra without having any of the Ghormans be able to listen to him. And he's able to convince his way past the guards, even though he doesn't have the proper clearance to be there after hours. Cyril makes contact with Dedra and tells her he's been able to make contact with the Ghorman front. Dedra is a little skeptical though, so Cyril strongly suggests that he believes that this is in fact them, which then is able to win Dedra over. And ultimately she seems satisfied by his progress. Cyril throughout the conversation has been obviously pretty excited about his advancements he has been able to make in this plan of theirs and asks if she will report this development to Partagaz. But she says no, because he will want more than what he's given her so far. This perhaps hurts Cyril's spirits a little bit on the inside, but his face in the moment more so conveys a determined sort of, alright, I've got more work to do sort of expression. Although in retrospect we knew this was the plan, this is the first time that the show actually confirms to the audience that Cyril is in fact playing a two-faced game here, trying to get all buddy-buddy with the Ghorman front, then act as an inside man for the Imperials so they can properly prepare for any sort of dangers they may possess. The next day on Coruscant, we get our first ISB meeting of the season. Legret and Hirt update Partagaz on some successful Imperial raids that were conducted 10 days prior. The thing of interest though is that Hirt, who you'll remember as Dedra's underling in Season 1, has now taken over the Axis desk since Dedra has been moved off it. He's identified some of the weapons that were seized in the raids as being part of the Axis supply chain. The fact that Axis is mentioned perks Dedra's interest as she begins intently listening. Considering that they also took a numerous amount of suspects into custody, you'd think that that would lead to some valuable information as regards to Axis, but no, they've gotten nothing. And this very much pisses Partagaz off. The fact that they haven't extracted any information of note from anybody is subpar work. However, Lonnie, as you'll remember as Luthen's inside man in the ISB, comes to Legrette's defense, saying that they're taking too many people in, and it's way too much information for them to properly process. Partagaz seems slightly impressed that Lonnie had the balls to stand up for Legrette, and acknowledges that this has been in fact a problem that they've been running into, and that he has a meeting scheduled with the Emperor to discuss amplifying the intake process. So once again, another great scene for Partagaz. He continues to be one of my favorite and most interesting characters in the show. Moments later, Dedra pulls Hirt aside to question him about things regarding to Axis. Now Dedra is upset that Hirt isn't calling her in to help him, because after all, this is what she really wants to be spending her time on. Hirt subtly but clearly enough suggests that maybe he just doesn't want her help, or want her to be around his project. Now Dedra is most definitely agitated by this because she very much wants to be the one running the show, and Hirt is currently running it in a way in which she doesn't deem adequate. Hirt is really just trying to brush Dedra away. He even takes a jab at her, saying that he was put on the project because he doesn't seek glory like her. This moment obviously struck a nerve with Dedra, and this need to prove herself and take glory for herself, as we all know, is going to bite her in the ass in the end. Meanwhile, elsewhere on Coruscant, Senator Mothma is trying to rally votes to kill the PORD. So the PORD was an imperial law established after the Aldhani heist back in Season 1, designed to crack down on anti-imperial activity, and that law is currently being aggressively used right now on Ghorman. Now, Mon wants this shut down because it's violating the rights of a lot of Imperial citizens. In addition to that, the crime rate has skyrocketed on a number of planets in which this law is being most heavily implemented, especially Ghorman, which has seen a 38% rise in crime rates, which is a statistic that she recognizes as being unusually odd, which leads her to believe that aggressive Imperial presence is what's causing those numbers to rise. She even says something along the lines of to her fellow senators, "Are we finding criminals or are we just making them?" However, although a number of these senators are people who Mon has good relationships with, who have voted with her on a number of similar issues in the past, won't vote with her here to avoid causing too many waves. Even the senator of Ghorman himself, who absolutely wants this Imperial occupation gone from his planet, won't vote to eradicate the PORD because he fears what may happen to himself and his planet if he pisses off the Emperor. This scene serves as a clear indication of what the current political landscape looks like at the moment. Although the Empire has been in power for the past 16 years, any semblance of the Republic is truly gone. Although the Republic was most certainly corrupt, especially towards the last couple of decades leading into the Clone Wars, senators, at least the vast majority of the time, were always able to vote the ways that they wanted without fear of survival. But the Senate has digressed to the point now where people are voting certain ways because they fear for their lives. Going against the will and wishes of the Emperor could lead to you and your planet's destruction, which shows that the Senate is no longer the Republican system that it once was. The Senate has now merely devolved into a puppet in this authoritarian regime. Later on, Lonnie makes his way down to the lower levels of Coruscant to have another chat with his real boss, Luthen. The last time these two met in this place, or at least the last time we saw them on screen in this place, because apparently they did meet 3 months prior off screen as per Luthen's dialogue, but that's besides the point. The last time we saw them together, Luthen proceeded to give the best speech in the entire show, and he has once again come to knock some sense into Lonnie. So Luthen wants an update on information, and Lonnie was able to discover that it is in fact Dedra that has been moved from the Axis project to head the Ghorman project. A fact that only a very select group of people are privy to. Although, why the Empire has such an interest in Ghorman, smearing Ghorman with propaganda the way they have, aggressively occupying the planet, is something that Lonnie and Luthen both can't wrap their heads around. One thing of interest that Lonnie notes is he strongly believes that the propaganda against Ghorman isn't being headed by the ISB, suggesting that there are multiple different entities within the Empire that are working together on this Ghorman initiative. You can tell that that is very concerning for Luthen, because if multiple different Imperial entities are on this and they've gone to such great lengths to keep this secret, then this has to be something really big and terrible that they're planning. He desperately wants information so that he can promptly prepare for what's to come. Although Lonnie can't give him any, he doesn't know anything else. So because of this, considering that this is becoming a desperate situation, Luthen tells Lonnie that from now on, they are going to be seeing each other much more often. Cut back to Ghorman. The underground meeting of the Ghorman front has begun, and Cyril has shown up in attendance to listen. Many different individuals come up to the mic to speak, all speaking in Ghor though, so Cyril isn't really able to understand them all that well. The big one of note here is a fella named Lazine. We'll be seeing a lot more of him down the line. The speakers are all very passionate, detailing their gripes with the Empire's occupation of their planet. The problem though is nobody really knows exactly what they should do. There doesn't seem to be an immediate solution to the problem. One big point of concern is there is currently a large structure that is being built overlooking Palmo Plaza, which many people believe to be an armory, which would be very concerning if proven to be true, because added Imperial military presence would surely only make things worse. During one of the speakers' speeches, Cyril is approached by Sam, the man who gave him the spider with the information in it earlier, and he appears to be subtly happy and impressed that Cyril managed to show up. Him showing up to this event when it would likely be considered treason if any higher ranking Imperials were to find out, just proves to Sam even more that Cyril is an asset that they can use. Cyril is also introduced for the first time to some of our other prominent Ghorman Front members, Enza and Dylan. So after the speech is concluded, Enza introduces Cyril to her father, Caro Rylans, the leader of the Ghorman Front, who gives him a warm welcome, telling him that he's very brave to be there. Although, he does believe that he may just be there to write a report of what took place to the Imperials. Cyril says that he isn't here to write a report, he is only here at his own volition. So this prompts Rylans to ask Cyril what exactly is this building that the Imperials are building. He presumably thinks that Cyril, being a member of the Imperial bureaucracy, would have at least some knowledge as to what massive structure is being built. And receiving that knowledge and being able to share it with his people would put a lot of minds at ease. Because as we saw earlier in the meeting, people are very concerned because nobody has any clue as to what is being built. As he put it just moments earlier, they are drowning in rumors. But Cyril doesn't have access to that information that he seeks. It is well above his pay grade to have privy to such information. That's obviously a less than ideal revelation for Rylans. So he pulls out the sympathetic card, educating Cyril on the Tarkin massacre that took place in Palmo Plaza 16 years prior. And Cyril acknowledges this by speaking back to them in their own language, which they are intrigued by. Perhaps they see this as confirmation that they do in fact have his sympathy going forward. Back on Coruscant, Luthen has summoned Cassian to give him his next assignment. And this assignment is much different than what Cassian is generally used to. Luthen wants some reconnaissance done on Ghorman. After the information he received from Lonnie, his interest as well as concern about what's going on Ghorman has increased drastically. He has vague knowledge of Ghorman and the Ghorman Front as a group. Cassian, however, is not very enthusiastic to take on the mission. Cassian being separated from Bix at the moment is not something that he is very comfortable with. As we discussed earlier, him protecting Bix is weighing very heavily on his mind, to the point where that is his most important concern, even more than the rebellion. This is something that factors greatly into his decision making, which contrasts with Luthen, who is much more robotic in the sense of, just do the job and come back. The attachment to Bix that Cassian possesses is starting to become an issue in the mind of Luthen, for Cassian's effectiveness to the rebellion and carrying out orders. Luthen just sees people and places merely as pieces on the board. We are starting to see this conflict here drive the two apart from each other, and this is what will ultimately lead Cassian, Bix, Wilman, as well as Vel breaking away from Luthen. Cut over to Dakar for the first time since Season 1. Luthen has sent Wilman to help Saw with a little problem that he has. So Saw has acquired a piece of equipment with the capabilities of extracting Rhydonium, and will soon be targeting an Imperial facility to extract some. However, the extraction process is extremely dangerous, and very few know how to properly do it. And this is where Wilman comes in, because he is one of those few. Saw walks in the bunker and conducts himself as intimidating and on edge as ever. You always feel the sense that he can crack at any minute. But Wilman is holding his ground firmly, not letting Saw intimidate him in any way. Saw then calls over Pluty, the man Wilman has been sent to teach the skill. The problem is though, there are 8 different extraction variation methods, and which one must be used I believe is dependent on the source in which they are getting the Rhydonium from. So this prompts Wilman to ask Saw which station they are targeting, so he can focus on teaching Pluty that specific sequence. But Saw doesn't want that information being revealed until the very last second. for reasons we'll understand later. So he tells him just to teach him all 8. This gets Ghorman concerned because he is supposed to leave tomorrow as per the details of the agreement, and there is no possible way that he'll be able to teach Pluty all 8 by tomorrow. Saw inevitably, though, doesn't care about what was agreed upon, and will only let Ghorman leave once Pluty properly understands all the sequence variations. And since Ghorman is here all by himself, there's nothing he can do to object to Saw's demands. So Ghorman is essentially going to be held hostage for the next little while. Saw is bending the agreement to his wishes, continuing to be the unpredictable man that he's always been. This is very in character for him, and ultimately why Saw is never able to fit into the rebellion at large, because he's way too morally inconsistent and unpredictable to be someone who can be relied upon. So a great little reintroduction scene here for Saw for Season 2. For our final scene of the episode, we cut back to Coruscant. It seems that off-screen that Cassian has ultimately decided to go ahead with the mission Luthen instructed for him, and he has one last romantic farewell with Bix before he is off. The one interesting thing of note, though, that the episode leaves us on, is after Cassian leaves and Bix stares out into the skyline, she takes what appears to be some pretty hard drugs, obviously with the purpose of trying to deal with the trauma that she's been dealing with. It's unclear how long she's been doing this up to this point, but if I had to guess, it has probably been for some time now. And she's done a good enough job of hiding it to where Cassian didn't suspect anything. This drug-induced state that Bix puts herself in to help ease the trauma that she's going through is something that the next 2 episodes are going to tackle. I also see this as amplifying, you could say, or justifying why Cassian feels the way he does at the moment about being so protective of Bix. Cassian knows she is not doing well, and this is exactly proof of that. This is what's happening when he's not around to be there for her. And with that, that wraps up episode 4. So in conclusion, when we take a look at the episode in its entirety, I not only see this as a great start to the second arc, but also a noticeable improvement upon the first 3 episodes. All of the storylines are intriguing up to this point. There is no clear weakness that stands out. The Cassian and Bix plotline, while perhaps a little slow, is absolutely essential and fleshes out the both of them very well. Bix is greatly struggling with the traumas she suffered over the past couple of years, and it's gotten to the point where not only herself is starting to become a handicap, but it's also starting to affect Cassian because he's no longer able to put his full focus into serving the rebellion, without constantly worrying about her safety. This episode does a great job of fleshing out that dynamic in their relationship, as well as their personal struggles at this point in the timeline. The Imperial section of this episode, while brief, is most definitely substantive. Not only do we see more of the conflict of interest with Dedra play out, her being tasked with the Ghorman project, although wanting to much rather be on the Axis project, something that was first established back in episode 2 and now further expanded upon here, but the episode also focuses a great deal on Lonnie. Episode 4 really shows us just how great of a secret rat in the system Lonnie is. How good he is at getting information that he's not supposed to have, but ultimately how it's all tearing him up inside. It's good that the writers establish or at least reintroduce that skill for Lonnie in season 2 here, so you can buy the fact that he was able to uncover the real facts regarding what the Emperor's energy project is later down the line in episode 10. And finally, the Ghorman storyline for me is probably the best part of the episode. We finally get to see the result of what has happened in the past year off screen with the Empire's initial stages for its plans on Ghorman. The mindsets of the Ghorman people are also really interesting and something that the episode thoroughly explores. They're kind of in that in-between stage at the moment, where it isn't like nothing's happening so there's nothing to talk about, but it also isn't so bad yet that they're fighting for their lives or in open rebellion against the Empire. They're in that questioning stage, questioning what is the right course of action moving forward. Do we resist? Do we not resist? Do we play appeasement? Or do we defy? It's interesting to see them work that out in their minds for themselves. Also, all the groundwork laid for Cyril's double agent scheme that he's engaged in is super well written, and gets you thoroughly invested to see how it's all going to play out in episodes 5 and 6. All of the accompanying stuff as well, like the brief bits with Mon, exploring the current political dynamics in the Imperial Senate, the brief bits with Luthen, as well as the opening parts of the Saw and Ghorman storyline, are the icing on the cake to an otherwise already very strong episode. So with all that said, I'm going to give episode 4 an 8 out of 10, a great episode for sure. And with that, that's just going to about wrap up part 4. If you've managed to make it this far, then as always, I give you a big thank you for taking the time to listen to some of my thoughts. And if you've enjoyed the video, then make sure to leave a like and hit that subscribe button so you'll be notified when I release part 5. These videos take a long time to script out and make, so any support would be greatly appreciated. And finally, let me know your guys' thoughts on episode 4 in the comments below. What did you guys think about episode 4 and the second arc in general? Do you think this is the point where Andor Season 2 really started to come into its own? I'll be interested to hear your guys' thoughts. But anyways, that's all I got for today. I will see you guys in the next one.